No.
Okay. I'm sorry. We're recording and I just realized we're having a problem. So,
Yeah, that probably has a dead battery.
and it's my pleasure to introduce our discussion leader, Meredith.
Thank you, Matt. My name is Meredith. I'm an alcoholic. Wow, full house tonight. That's great. We are in Bill's story tonight, and I was taught to read this textbook to find myself in these pages and to identify. Because if I can identify, particularly with the first few chapters, then I'm probably in the right meeting. And Bill's story is in the front because it was written as a written 12-step. We already were given the problem with the doctor's opinion, which tells us we suffer from a physical allergy that then fuels the mental obsession. And over our drinking period, both progress. The more I drink, the more I fuel the obsession, and the harder and harder it becomes till eventually one day we don't have any power of choice whether or not we're going to take that first drink. And it tells us that if we've gotten to that point in our drinking, that we probably need a psychic change. And the doctor's opinion talks about it being an essential psychic change, which means it's necessary to recover from alcoholism if we are alcoholic of the type that's described in this book, which is why it's a great idea to self-diagnose according to this, rather than what we are here. When I first came to AA, if I listened very selectively to what I heard out there, I didn't need to be here because I still had a job and a car and, and things like that stuff. I still had stuff. I wanted to kill myself every day, but I had stuff. So I just didn't think I had a problem as bad as you guys. Like you guys needed stabs and all that. And my program lasted about 90 days and I drank again. And I came in here desperate and my hearing was much different. And I heard all kinds of things that I could relate to. And then my sponsor told me to read this book and identify myself. And that's what I've done. And so in Bill's story, we try to look on each page. If I've read this book, I should find something highlighted on every page of his story. We drink because we feel. We drink because we don't feel like we belong. We drink because good stuff happens, bad stuff happens. We also don't think we have a drinking problem. Other people are concerned way before we are. Like Bill was in college and everybody was already concerned. And I was in college and people were concerned and I didn't quit for another 25 years. So it takes what it takes. But anyway, I'm just trying to make sure everybody's on mute out there and they are. I mean, bless you or whatever that was. And
I'm good. Thanks.
all right, we're on page 13. On this page in Bill's story, he is already, what's happened for him is he's gotten all three pieces of the puzzle. Through his experience, he learned on page 7, after trying all manner of trying to not drink or to control and enjoy, he learned from his brother-in-law that he's seriously ill mentally and physically.
Brother-in-law.
Sisters, this first doctor was his brother-in-law.
Right.
But anyway, and now it couldn't, because it says my brother-in-law is a physician, and through his kindness, it was placed in a nationally known hospital. All right, so maybe we met Dr. Silver.
Okay, yeah, all right. I was right. I was right here as well.
I was wrong. Here we are, mark it on your calendar. The good thing, though, I may be wrong, but I'm rarely in doubt. I mean, I say it like it's true. All right, so he learns from Silkworth he's bodily and mentally ill, and that his will is amazingly weakened by the action of alcohol. So he feels a little bit comforted by the fact that, okay, there's a diagnosis for this. It's an illness. And Bill Wilson was known to say you can no more cure alcoholism with your mind than you can tuberculosis. And so it helps connect the dots for alcoholics. And then it says that his incredible behavior was explained. And so I thought, oh, now that I know what I suffer from, I can control it. Well, that wasn't true. And then he meets, Ebby comes to visit him, and Ebby is part of his spiritual journey, is service to others and carrying his message to a suffering alcoholic, which is his good buddy Bill, who drank like Ebby, and Ebby knew this would probably work for him. And Bill was astonished, page 9, to see that he was fresh-skinned and glowing, something different about his eyes, starry-eyed look, he says. And then he tells me he's got religion. And Bill's like, I was aghast, which means shocked with amazed terror. Bill's like, what's happened to my friend? And Bill expected him to rant and rave, and ranting is a little bit insane, that Abby was very sane and quiet and presented this practical program of action, confess our shortcomings, be deflated, begin to admit we can rely on a greater power, be of service to others. And so Abby lays this out for him. And Bill is like, wow, this might work. And he noticed that very strongly, he's on a whole different footing. And then Bill wants to throw the argument back, well, I don't believe in that God. And Eddie says, okay, come up with your own conception of God. Why don't you do that? And it's that ended the argument, which is good because Bill had some encounters with faith throughout his life. And in the Winchester Cathedral, he had a spiritual moment. So Ebby said, you got to latch onto that. And the interesting thing is, in Bill's story, he talks about how he never again could get that conversation with Ebby out of his mind. So it was a very effective conversation, one alcoholic talking with another. And even though Bill drank again one more time, or maybe even more, I don't know, but he never again could get that idea of Ebby's message out of his mind. And that's what they say here, AA will mess with your drinking. And so then like he says on the bottom of 12, the real significance of my experience in the cathedral burst upon me. For a brief moment, I had needed and wanted God. There had been a humble willingness to have him with me, and he came. And then it says, but soon the sense of his presence was blotted out by worldly clamors, mostly those within myself. So we really need to feel it, right? It's like when I drink, I need the feeling. And same with this God thing. We desperately need to feel that God is near. We need that assurance, which means we've got to open that channel and keep it clear. And that's what the steps do. Because if we're not careful, worldly clamors, loud, incessant noises of life, the Rensley, I had that fight with so-and-so, all these things that block out our conscious contact with God. So he says he learned. And so where we saw, when these things were done. So Ebby comes on page 13, Ebby comes and they work the steps as they knew them at the time. There were no steps written out. There weren't, even though we talked about the 6 steps, the Oxford groups weren't sending out a book that said, here's our 6 steps. Everyone that got the spiritual awakening through the steps were all handed down like Indian lore. Whoever did it to you, that's how you did it. And a lot of the times they did that first step in the hospital. Do you believe in God? Well, yeah. And in those days, most people did. Like some will say, well, I'm not really right with God and I don't know where he is. And well, do you believe? Yeah. Do you think maybe he can help you? Yeah. And then they start writing out the inventory in the hospital. And then they talk to them about what it's going to be like when they get out, how they're going to meet once a week, and they're going to have assignments to go help others. And they get busy right away. So anyway, so on page 13, we can see the steps that we now use in this action that was taken. Humbly offered myself to God. Step 3, I faced my sins and became willing to have my newfound friend take them away. That's the second paragraph, root and branch. That's 6, 7. 4, 6, 7. My schoolmate visited me and I fully equated him my problems. That's 5. We made a list of people. They didn't even say, here, you shaky-handed individual still in the hospital and reeking of alcohol. I'll make the list. You start talking. And that's what they did. They tell them their story and the sponsor starts writing out the list for them of who to make a message. So it's not like, well, I'm not done with my list yet because we are done with the list. And then expressing the willingness to keep going. And then it talks about testing my thinking by the new God consciousness within. That's what we know as step 10, God consciousness, awareness of the God that lives within. And that's what happens. If we do this thoroughly, to the best of our ability, we will feel something start to change inwardly. And that's the beautiful thing, because that makes God a lot more accessible than out there in the heavens. And then he says, I was to sit quietly when in doubt, asking only for knowledge of his will. So we sit in prayer and quiet and we wait. And if nothing happens, we don't do anything if we don't have to, right? We can wait. And then we're starting on the bottom. So he's essentially followed all the steps of the Oxford groups, except the last one, which is service to others. Okay. And that's what we're picking up tonight.
My friend promised when these things were done, I would enter upon a new relationship with my Creator, that I would have the elements of a way of living which would answer all my problems. Belief in the power of God, plus enough willingness, honesty, and humility to establish and maintain the new order of things were the essential requirements. Simple, but not easy. A price had to be paid. It meant destruction of self-centeredness. I must turn in all things to the Father of light, He presides over us all.
Okay, so He's promises when these things are done, I'm going to enter. So again, this is all to put us into a new phase. This is but a beginning. And it really starts to take shape as we practice what we know today is 10, 11, and 12. And so he says, when you get everything done, you get right with God and you start making restitution of those harms, and you're getting into a habit of prayer and meditation. Now you can enter this new relationship with God. And it says we're going to have the elements of a manner of living. Again, those elements are this, and they are practiced until they become into we just do them. And then it talks about what's going to be needed. Believe in the power of God, which doesn't just say believing in God, believing in the power of God, and that we have access. And if we get sober, stay sober, clearly there is a power greater than us, because I did not get sober on my own. So usually we start with that. Well, it was enough to get me sober. Now we have to learn how do we leverage that power in other places of our lives. So it says, well, we need to believe in the power of God because he got us sober. Enough willingness. How much? It'll tell us on the next page. Honesty and humility to establish and maintain the new order of things. So we see in how it works, grasping and developing. There's a lot of those kind of phrases in this book. And this one says we have to establish and maintain this new order of things. And the new order essentially is I'm not running the show. I have to learn how to turn to God in all things. Again, it's a practice. We practice this. How do we do that? It tells us in step 12, 11, we pause when we're agitated. We pause when we're not sure what to do. And we ask God. And we ask God. Up until now, we've been asking a sponsor if we've gotten one. If not, and the sponsor is helping you along and say, have you prayed about it yet? No, I haven't. All right, pray about it, call me back. Just get used to doing it, because we want you to be God reliant and not person reliant. People are going to let us down. I'm not with my first sponsor. Okay. And I'm still sober because I have a reliance on God. But it says these are essential requirements. It's actually necessary to be putting ourselves on the new footing because self-reliance has failed us. So we need to be convinced that self-reliance fails. And this whole thing about I'm having trouble with step 2, I don't know if I believe in God. You don't have to believe to be. You got to believe that you have to not believe in you. Page 25 says, just don't believe you can do it. That's a good starting. And then come in here and listen and just ask God to show you the way, and you'll get moved into a direction. Let's start reading because I'm talking about it. All right. So yes, I see. Simple but not easy. Simple but not easy. A price had to be paid. A price has to be paid for all of this new order of things and the new relationship. The price is paid, and the price is destruction of self-centeredness, not the diminishment or the lessening of. And the only way we're going to get to destruct self-centeredness is by doing a pretty good routine on 10, 11, and 12. Because that's what's going to open the way. A good 10 will show us 11, and 11 will show us 10, and then we put it into action. So the best way to destroy self-centeredness in action is to do for others. And that's what we're going to be talking about here in step 12.
Mad alcoholic.
Matt.
And the one thing I would point out, that first paragraph, elements of a way of living, which answered all my problems. Notice it doesn't just say alcohol. And I bring that up because I kind of missed that part and got myself into some extra trouble along the way that didn't involve alcohol, because I didn't turn all of my stuff over to a power greater than myself, and probably didn't do a great job in the destruction of self-centeredness. So just my experience with it. Anybody have anything you want to weigh in on?
Well, luckily for me, I had a sponsor who, not unlike Bill, Bill, he got these ideas when he was still drinking and in the hospital, and he put them into practice at once. And even though I didn't know how to put them into practice and I wasn't feeling any less self-centered, frankly, I didn't know I was self-centered. But that aside, my sponsor said, get to meetings early and say hello to people and introduce yourself, remember their names. I'm like, what? And I just like to walk in and keep my head down and sit. Just you need to reach out to others and connect. And she said, come early and be of service, wipe down the countertops, this and that. I loved coming in here and straightening the chairs. And this one guy, Tommy, would come and I'd say, he was here first. Damn it, the chairs were all straight. And it was like my thing I did, So just to think of how I can do something for somebody else. I'd be cleaning the ashtrays outside. I don't even smoke, doesn't matter, clean the ashtrays. And And so I was doing them even though I didn't want to, but it helped me practice not thinking about me every minute. It's all about this practice.
Okay, these were revolutionary and drastic proposals, but the moment I fully accepted them, the effect was electric. There was a sense of victory, followed by such a peace and serenity as I had never known. There was utter confidence. I felt lifted up, as though the great clean wind of a mountaintop blew through and through. God comes to most men gradually, but his impact on me was sudden and profound. For a moment, I was alarmed and called my friend the doctor to ask if I were still sane. He listened in wonder as I talked. Finally, he shook his head, saying, "Something has happened to you I don't understand, but you'd better hang on to it. Anything is better than the way you were." The good doctor now sees many men have such experiences. He knows that they are real. While I lay in the hospital, the thought came that there were thousands of hopeless alcoholics who might be glad to have what had been so freely given to me. Perhaps I could help some of them. They, in turn, might work with others.
Okay. Talking about here the revolutionary and drastic. Revolutionary means causing rapid change. It also means a rapid transfer of power. So I think about that word in this context. It's about going rapidly with the help of a sponsor saying, go, rapid transfer of power from self reliance to reliance on a higher power. Now, I hadn't gotten to the place where I totally understood what God was doing in my life or anything like that, but I knew that my sponsor was being directed by a higher power and I was able to follow her. I believe that she got what she got by doing what she did. It was very practical. All right. But she seemed very spiritual, and I was just looking for a less sucky life. I didn't really set a high bar for what I was going to get here. And then he talked about the moment I fully accepted them, the effect was electric, sense of victory and all that. And he paints quite a big picture of how profoundly, which means deeply, he was changed. All I know is I definitely started to have a different attitude and outlook, and I felt more hope. And I definitely felt like the way I was going was in a track that made sense. It wasn't just kind of vaguely, coming along, listening and hoping something was going to happen. I felt like I was being led in the direction that might take me to a place where my life would actually be better and I wouldn't hate myself and everybody else, by the way. And then he says he was alarmed, right? He called his friend because he really had this like white light experience. And actually, he talks about, the doctor says, I don't know what's happened to you, but keep it. And the doctor says here, he now sees many men who have had such experiences. He knows that they are real. And he's talking about the essential psychic change. And the essential psychic change is referenced like 3 times on one page in a doctor's opinion. And psychic is of the mind and the soul. And that's very deep. And so when it talks about the message which can interest and hold these alcoholics must have depth and weight, that's because our alcoholism is deep and weighty. When was the last time we really came clean about all that crap running through our heads? All the stuff that's not been fixed, all the anxiety we have about things, all the resentment we have, right? That's the depth of our alcohol. How many times I walked into that bar, couldn't wait to have that first drink because it was like silverware in the blender. And I'm saying to all my bar buddies, hey, doing great, doing great, doing great. Everybody's doing great. Nobody's talking about, man, that obsession was on me. Like, I cannot believe it. I couldn't wait to get here. We weren't talking about the real stuff going on, even though a lot of those alcoholic friends ended up here eventually. So, but it says here, the doctor sees that people change by doing this, and he knows they are real, which means factual. And so we need real God. We need real evidence. And here's a doctor saying this stuff is real, but we don't know how to give it to you, but this will give it to you. And then it says, this is where Bill says he actually had his white light experience. This is what he says happened. The thought came that was not from him. While I lay in the hospital, the thought came. There were thousands of hopeless alcoholics who might be glad to have what had been so freely given me. Perhaps I could help some of them. They, in turn, might help others. He calls it the chain reaction of the spiritual experience. He had this vision that God gave him. This guy who pictured himself a leader who was thrown out of the places he worked because he was so drunk, who was stealing money from his wife, was unemployable for 5 years, and God gives him a vision that leads to this tonight. Imagine if we acted on all of our good intentions. So, That's pretty amazing to me.
Yeah, mad alcoholic. That's one of the things. I mean, you're right. I think a lot of people say this is where AA started. After he had worked the steps with Ebby, he has this powerful spiritual experience. And there's this sentence here. There was utter confidence. And I've read, studying spiritual matters, since I've been in AA. If somebody has a genuine spiritual experience, it is often characterized by complete confidence, the absolute sureness. Now, of course, they may be crazy and no, I'm still. But he truly had a spiritual experience. And then it is interesting that he has this powerful spiritual experience. And one of the very next thoughts he has is that, hey, I should go help other guys. I mean, that's amazing. I mean, these are one of the things I've read that make me think, something was at play here. This is one of the many things, if you learn about the history of AA, that's like, wow, how did all this stuff happen to come about that we're all here tonight and there's nobody in charge? And we just got to put a couple of bucks in the basket. I thought we'd mess it up.
Yeah, and I could help some, and they might work with others to have that vision of the paying it forward. And now we're going to get more into is about step 12.
Anybody else? All right. My friend had emphasized the absolute necessity of demonstrating these principles in all my affairs. Particularly was it imperative to work with others as he had worked with me. Faith without works was dead, he said, and how appallingly true for the alcoholic. For if an alcoholic failed to perfect and enlarge his spiritual life through work and self-sacrifice for others, he could not survive the certain trials and low spots ahead. If he did not work, he would surely drink again, and if he drank, he would surely die. Then faith would be dead indeed. With us, it is just like that.
So the absolute necessity of demonstrating these principles on my affairs, particularly necessary to work with others. That's at the core of what we do here. The forward and third edition talks about the 12 steps in any language. It's 12 steps, and that's at the core of this thing. Personal, one-on-one. We talk about what we do here, but we do it outside of the meeting. Okay? We share our experience in how we do it here, but the real work happens outside of the meeting. And then it says, we perfect and enlarge our spiritual life through, and you almost expected to say prayer and meditation. In fact, I always if people say, we're going to have a meeting on spirituality, I love it, and I wait until the end. And it's sure enough, it goes to third step, trouble with step 2, prayer, meditation. Spiritual life is what I do with my day. And it says right here, I grow my spiritual life through work and self-sacrifice for others. Spirituality is about step 12. About step 3 or even 11. It's about step 12 because it's where we change internally and act differently. We change internally and act differently in our homes, our occupations, and our affairs. And we self-sacrifice. Every time I do something I don't want to do, it's a little more self-sacrifice. When you talk about work, it doesn't have to be just necessarily working the steps. It's fighting the resistance in myself to do what's right. I want to retaliate. I want to do it because they did it to me. But what's right is to say a nice thing back. Forgive. Because how many times have I been forgiven? And those are definitely drastic proposals. See, what we learn to do here is definitely opposite of what we learned out there. But this is the only way we can hope to change and how we can hope to change our little corner of the world. And that's the other thing I learned. Wow, I don't have to piss and moan about what's going on 300 miles from here. I just got to see what I can do here in my little pod. All right? And it says, why does faith, how do we perfect and enlarge our faith? We do it this working self-sacrifice for others. Well, how does that do it? Because we see evidence of God when we do that. We see gratitude from other people. Thank God he stopped and talked to me. Or, when you took me to that Rule 62 barbecue and I had a really good time, I felt like if that's what friendliness and happens in AA, then maybe I'll try a meeting again. And so we see, and I know for myself, my eyes were dead like a shark. My sponsor told me so. Dead like a shark's when I came here. And I was hard-edged, apathetic, although beneath apathy was like, eat it, I want friends. Let's stay away from me. So there was a lot going on the inside that I couldn't reconcile unless someone helped me along. All right. And because I have developed this way of living, when I hit those trials and low spots, it doesn't take me out. The faith has been established. I have a track record with God. I've gone through some crap, man. A lot of it is sobriety. And because I've followed what I'm supposed to do here, essentially the 4 things we're told in step 10, when they crop up, ask God to remove, make an apology if I need to, and turn my thoughts to something that can help. That's the recipe over and over again. And when I do that, my life and the quality of my life gets better. I'm not in morbid reflection and all that. And if faith dies, I am dead. If I stop seeing proof of God, which you tell me I need to stay sober, then I'm going to die. I know that. I know because sometimes I've thought about killing myself. It doesn't mean I'm going to die from alcoholism. I might die from isolation. All right. Anybody want to share? Hey, Bina. It's me. Thank you. The doctor's opinion says that it's part of our rehabilitation to commence to present these conceptions to other alcoholics, and they must do likewise with still others. So in the doctor's opinion, this is the remedy. And ever since I've done this remedy, I haven't had to go to rehab. Thank you. That's great here. Yeah, you can't start too early, right?
My wife and I abandoned ourselves with enthusiasm to the idea of helping other alcoholics to a solution of their problems. It was fortunate, for my old business associates remained skeptical for a year and a half, during which I found little work. I was not too well at the time and was plagued by waves of self-pity and resentment. This sometimes nearly drove me back to drink, but I soon found that when all other measures failed, work with another alcoholic would save the day. Many times I have gone to my old hospital in despair. On talking to a man there, I would be amazingly lifted up and set on my feet. It is a design for living that works in rough going.
Love this part. These 2 paragraphs are going to tell us 8 ways in Sunday how life's going to suck sober. Which is great, because just the page before, a girl had a white light experience. And suddenly, hey, you know what? It's going to suck. And it says here, but first it starts out with my wife and I abandon ourselves. I think of she doesn't have makeup on, the sink's full of dishes, but they got to go pick up an Al-Anon and a drunk and go do something. This idea that what we're doing right now doesn't matter as much as this, because they knew this was going to help them with the enthusiasm to the idea of helping other alcoholics to a solution to their problems. And Bill says, that was fortunate because I couldn't find work for about a year and a half. Unemployed in sobriety. Excellent. Was not too well at the time and was plagued by waves of self-pity and resentment. That's no good, right? This sometimes nearly drove me back to drink, but I soon found that when all other measures failed, measures including going to a meeting, calling a sponsor, maybe staying home, turning off all the lights and watching Law and Order and eating a pint of ice cream, everything. When those all fail, I found that. So you discover, maybe if I think less of me and more of somebody else that'll help. I mean, I never thought that could be a remedy for me, to ignore me. So it's just, let's see, well, it's used. So it says here, I soon found when all the other resolutions failed, work another alcoholic would save the day. I love the idea of save the day. I could have a whole crappy day of self-centeredness, doing nothing for anybody. By the end of the day, I'm feeling kind of bad about it, and I'm not feeling very uplifted or hopeful. But I go to the 7 o'clock Sunday night meeting, which I don't want to go to, by the way, even though it's my home group, and I love doing the book. I still don't want to go. But I do it, and then, wow, at least there's something redeemable out of the day. And that's what these other centered actions do for our lives. We are redeemable. We aren't worthless. We aren't here for no reason. So, and then it talks about, many times I've gone to my old hospital in despair. Oh, good. We're going to be despairing. That sounds great. But here's the other thing. He's not waiting till he feels better to share what he has. He feels crummy and knows the remedy is to stop thinking about how crummy he feels. And remember, oh, those folks are in the hospital for the 9th time, detoxing and thinking they're just going to go through the same cycle again. And he says, on talking to a man there, I would be amazingly lifted up. Just by sharing his experience, revives the hope in him. Just by talking about what has happened in his life, he starts to feel better and he feels picked up by something outside of himself. I do the possible, God does the impossible. All right? And then it says, it's a design for living that works in rough going. Item number 4, rough going. So we've got 4 things already that aren't our favorite things in sobriety, but this program gets us through these and to a point where we can be lifted up in the middle of them. And that's how we get glimpses of heaven. Heaven is just awareness of God. That's why when Bill talks about, I have evidence of fourth dimension, rocking it, blah, blah, blah. Sometimes it's a little much for me. But if I can see evidence that God is reaching out a loving hand somehow, that gives me hope. And really, we only need enough hope for the day. Tomorrow, we get to fill up on all new hope. Were you going to say something? I remember telling my sponsor, I was thinking, and she said, that's the problem. We were thinking. I was like, you got me to finish my 7th. Yes. Glad you're here. Being asked. Thank you. We got Eileen out there in Zoom land. Let me get a speaker view on here. Oh, there we go. There's Eileen. Eileen. Hey.
Raise my hand.
Well, I can see you just waved, got suckered. Get it? Yeah, George Costanza, that living in opposite land. If we do that in the beginning, you're going to be a success. But you're not going to be able to hang on to that. It's not a lie if you believe it. That one's going to have to go. I believe that plane. Was me too. That's the problem. What we were talking about here, all this resistance comes from our minds. And that's where the illness centers. That's really what we shouldn't be thinking about. You know, that's why that thing is upside down. My sponsor said, that doesn't apply to you yet. I'll let you know when you can do that. I have a sponsee that says, I figured out I don't have to believe everything I think. She's like, those are a discovery for her. That's the beauty of it. Even if we can just practice the opposite, especially in the beginning, we're probably going to get where we need to go. Do we want to? No, just do we want to start here?
Thank goodness. What's left? You're the discussion leader.
Yeah. Well, there's it's 4 more ways where it's going to be difficult sober, so we might as well learn about those now and get it out of the way. Oh yes, someone have their hand up. That's how it works. Step 10 says continue for a lifetime. And I remember I had so much resistance at first, and I would forget things, and I wouldn't have them down there. And most recently, I started asking God those questions. Where was I resentful? Where was I selfish? And more stuff comes up than I would have seen otherwise. But it's a great exercise. I worked with Swansea earlier today. We had a howl over it. I just remembered something. Great, let's put that down. But it's great. Like, Bill believed a lot in that. And really, if we can't see what we're doing, how many times did we do stuff we didn't even know we were doing? This gives us a purposeful, fulfilling life, right? Thank you for sharing, and thank everybody for good.
Thanks for being here, everybody.